In this video, we're going to be talking about isolation and what God established in isolation. We experienced a version of isolation during the COVID shutdowns. And unfortunately, the majority of us did not recognize isolation for what God has established, the opportunity that He was giving for us to return to Him. We had a lot of freedoms at that time, financial freedoms. We had opportunities that He conformed for His people so that we could go into isolation, we could return to Him, we could understand the times, we could be passed over, and we didn't understand it, we didn't perceive it. So I want you to understand, when God starts sending these things and another shutdown happens and we have to close our doors and we are forced to isolate, I want you to perceive what is happening, what God is calling you into. Stop making it about the government. Stop saying that the government has power. It is God who has power. And if you perceive it and you do what He has said, you're not going to be afraid. You're not going to feel that someone's ruling over you. You're going to know who's in charge. I'm going to read some scriptures to you, and I want you to listen to what God is saying. How did He establish isolation? What has He commanded? Isaiah 26, 20 through 21. Go, my people, enter your rooms and shut the doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while until His wrath has passed by. See, the Lord is coming out of His dwelling to punish the people of the earth for their sins. The earth will disclose the bloodshed on it. The earth will conceal its slain no longer. Those of you who are complaining that there's nothing that you can do anymore, that you're isolated from the rest of the world and you want to find a church so that you can feel like you're linked in, get comfortable with isolation. Get comfortable with being with God. There is nowhere for you to go. There's nowhere for you to entertain yourself. I understand. I feel the grief too, because I used to like to watch movies and TV, and now there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing that we can watch, because frankly, we were never supposed to occupy ourselves with that voice on that TV. And so now we're feeling the pains of having to separate from the flesh and separate from the world, and it hurts because we don't know what else to do. But you know what? You've probably been saying for a very long time, I have no time. I have no time to do the things that God wants me to do. Well, guess what? Now you have the time. Stop trying to distract yourself and get comfortable being with God. Exodus 12, 14 through 16. And this day will be a memorial for you, and you are to celebrate it as a feast to the Lord, as a permanent statute for the generations to come. For 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. On the first day you are to remove the leaven from your house. Now leaven, yeast, that represents sin. Whoever eats anything leavened from the first day through the seventh day must be cut off from Israel. What is the symbolism? Remove the yeast from your house. You are a house. On the first day you are to hold a sacred assembly, and another on the seventh day. You must do no work on those days except to prepare the meals. That is all you may do. Sorry, we're continuing on to verse 17. So you are to keep the feast of unleavened bread, for on this day I brought your division out of the land of Egypt. You must keep this day as a permanent statute for the generations to come. Hello, have you been taught to observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or you've been taught to observe Easter? And let me ask you something. Why is it that the world is not interested in observing God's holy days? How come they don't want to do that, but they jump to observe these pagan holidays that Catholicism established and that the prostitutes through the Reformation continue to observe? Why is that? Do you observe Easter and Christmas and Valentine's Day and Patrick's Day? Do you observe those the same way as you observe God's holy days? Then why are you observing them to Him? Why are you claiming that Christmas and Easter are holidays that are observed to Jesus Christ? They bear no significance and no resemblance to what God has established. Why in the world would we think that that is of Him? Why in the world would we think that when the world and pagans run after these things, but they leave what God has established alone? These are things we have to be thinking about. These are things we have to be considering. Why it is that these churches who claim to be serving Him lead us down the road of pagan observances, and they leave alone God's holy things, His holy commandments, His holy days. Why do they leave them alone just like the pagans do? Why do they chase after what the world does like the pagans do? So you are to keep the feast of unleavened bread. For on this day I brought your divisions out of the land of Egypt. Why are you to keep this? Because he wants you to remember what he has done. Is that what you're doing in Easter and Christmas? I doubt it. You are remembering a version of what counterfeit Christianity has spoon-fed you, that Christ has done everything for you and you owe him nothing in return. You set up little images in your nativity scenes and you kiss them and bow down to them like the Catholic Church taught you to do. And even if you're not doing those things, pay attention to the relationship that you have with those images, because that relationship is what is in your heart. You are having a relationship with a false Christ, with images and a false version of the Messiah. And I know that because if you had a relationship with the Messiah, he would move you to follow his laws and be careful to keep his decrees, and he would let you know that what you're doing is wrong. You must keep this day as a permanent statute for the generations to come. So it is not to be abolished. It is not something that was the burden of Jews or Israelites. It is something that all of us are supposed to be doing. And the reason we're supposed to be doing it is to remember what God did for the Israelites. If we remembered what God did for the Israelites, we might also remember or perceive what he did for us when he set apart the United States for us to have a promised land where we could worship him freely. And look what we did to it. Look what we've done to the extent that this is the false prophet that is testifying to counterfeit Christianity. In the first month, you are to eat unleavened bread from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days, there must be no leaven found in your houses. If anyone eats something leavened, that person, whether a foreigner or native of the land, must be cut off from the congregation of Israel. You are not to eat anything leavened. Eat unleavened bread in all your homes. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and told them, go at once and select for yourselves a lamb for each family and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a cluster of hyssop, dip it in the blood in the basin, and brush the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe. None of you shall go out of the door of this house until morning. That sound like isolation? Close your doors, rid your house of yeast representing sin. What are you doing? You're returning to God. That's what God established in isolation. Obedience and return to God. Return to me and I will heal you. Return to me and I will protect you. Return to me and I will restore you and your land, and you will not live in fear of your enemies, and the land will bear its fruit. Return, return, return. That return happens in isolation. That is what God has established. When the Lord passes through to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the door frame and will pass over that doorway, so he will not allow the destroyer to enter your house and strike you down. Let me ask you something. Is this wrath that God brought, is God capable of passing over his people without actually pulling them up to heaven? He can pass over them when they're in the same town, living among the others who he is destroying. And yet counterfeit Christians do not perceive that God is capable of sparing his people from his wrath, even though they're on the same earth, even though they're in the same town. No, they have to make up a story about pre-tribulation rapture, that he's got to take us up because he is not capable of punishing and saving in the same town. And you are to keep this command as a permanent statute for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, you are to keep this service. When your children ask you, what does this service mean to you? You are to reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck down the Egyptians and spared our homes. Is that the story you're being told on Easter? That the story that you understand? Then the people bowed down and worshipped, and the Israelites went and did what the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, while all of us counterfeit Christians teach our children, take a picture with the Easter bunny, go collect that candy, go sugar yourself up, get in the spirit. Do you understand what the word says about how to raise our children? That it would be better for a millstone to be hung around the neck and thrown into the depths of the sea than for us to cause one of these little ones to stumble. That we are to raise up our children in the way they should go, so that when they are old, they will not depart from it. And these are the things we do. You see the command right here. These are the things you are to teach your children for generations to come. This is an everlasting commandment. It was never abolished. And yet, why am I learning this in my 40s? Why is it that God taught me this in my 40s? Why are we not learning this from the worthless shepherds in those counterfeit churches that we were raised in? You understand that if we return to his truth, we are going to understand how to live. He is going to give us the time that we need to spend with him. And we're going to have to do some things like separate from the things that he's commanded us not to do. And we are going to end up with more time than we ever thought we could ever have to be with him. We are distracting ourselves with things that don't matter, with responsibilities that we imposed on ourselves because we placed the world before God. These are the things that God has established with regard to isolation. He wants us to return to him. He wants us to recognize that when he sends these things, if his people who are called by his name will return to him, he will return to us. But we return to him in isolation. In Leviticus 13, God talks about when someone has a rash on their body or when a house has mold. They are to go into isolation. You are to isolate the house or you are to isolate yourself for 7 days. If it doesn't start getting better, you're cast out of the camp. If that house doesn't start getting better, it is torn down. And all of those stones are removed somewhere outside of the camp and they are destroyed. This is not a suggestion. It is a command. That is what God established with regard to isolation. And so a person who is starting to get better or a house that is starting to be cleansed is then closed up again. That person goes back into isolation for another 7 days because what does that represent? It represents that they have begun to return to God and they need to return to him again for another 7 days in order to finish the work that he has started in them. About 2 weeks ago, I shared with you that I had canned some turkey that was sitting on my stove because I didn't plan well for Sabbath. And so I hurried up and canned that turkey on Friday night, and God turned the turkey bitter. Not only did he turn the turkey bitter, but he made me sick. He sent me illness, just like he promises he will do. You watched me progressively get better. I shared with you that I had to return to him, that I needed to isolate myself in him. I even set some boundaries because there were some people who were contacting me inappropriately. And I let you know, this is not what I have been set apart for. I need to be doing the work that I teach you, and you need to do the work that I teach you, rather than expecting me to be your personal shepherd. And I'm really grateful and happy to report that it was heard and it was received well because that stopped. But I want to tell you something, that it's really easy to jump into these things, right? Like when your resources are down and people are pulling on you and pulling for something that you have not been set apart to give. It can be really easy to jump into that pattern. I also shared with you that I had contractors here every single day, and I was allowing that to disrupt my schedule with God. And so the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I needed to take a look at everything that was going on in my life, everything that I was beginning to get pulled into, and I needed to tighten it up. And I needed to make sure that I had a situation in which I could truly return to God without being pulled in these different directions. 7 days, I got progressively better. Another 7 days to finish what God started. And it's Sabbath, 2 weeks later, and I'm good. While others are going into the hospital, while others are dying from the so-called flu, while others are saying, I had it for 3 weeks, I want you to understand that the things I teach you are true. The things I teach you, you are observing with your own ears. I do not teach you something that I do not do. I teach you according to his word, and I teach you according to my testimony that I received by his Spirit. I want you to understand the importance of isolation, because we are going to be put into a position, I believe it's going to happen sooner than later, where we are going to be isolated again. And I don't want you to loathe it. I want you to perceive it. Stop acting like you need this huge support system and this huge congregation to be a part of. That will become a stumbling block to you if that's what you believe, because there are very few Christians available to us at this point in history. And frankly, we don't need that. What we need is God. And I'm not saying to forsake the gathering of the saints. I'm just saying there's not a whole lot of them, are there? So you need to be discerning about who you're surrounding yourself with. Connect with other saints, but you need to have a correct relationship with them. You don't cling on to them. You don't have BFFs. God is your BFF. He's the only one you're supposed to be clinging to. You need to get comfortable with not having someone there to validate every step you take or to bring your grievances to so that you replace God with that kind of community. We are not relating right with each other. And I blame mental health and I blame counterfeit Christianity, but I also blame us, our own hearts. Because if we were having a relationship with God, he would draw us into that and he would say, I am the one you are to crave. Whether or not we're isolated by some sort of imposition, we need to be bringing ourselves into isolation, not because it's a suggestion, because it's a commandment. We need to be shutting our doors, cleansing our houses of yeast, waiting until his wrath has passed by, and returning our hearts to him. He has established it. I don't care what government thinks they're doing when they shut everyone down or whatever it is, because frankly, I've told you a million times, I don't think that there's a man who's ruling over us. I don't believe that we are the ones who appoint these leaders. I think that the fraud that's going on at these polls and everything else, that we're fools. We're fools right now fighting this. We need to understand who appoints these leaders, but we would rather go after man and say, oh, he committed fraud. How about return to God? How about just do what he said? No, we'd rather fight. We'd rather fight and blame man for the spirit that we've chosen to rule over us. Isolate, fast, rid your house of yeast, return to God, and he will heal you. All of these things have been set in motion. I don't believe that they're going to change, but you will receive wisdom. You will receive peace. You will receive the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and a heart to understand. And he will move you to do what you need to do in this covenant. And that should be your concern right now. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.